There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Kevin Warner, who is co-founder and CEO at Leadium. Kevin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, no problem. I'm excited. We're going to be talking about the top 3 repetitive, automated, and data-related tasks that take your internal team away from making human connections, closing deals with prospects, and could be outsourced at a lower cost and better success rate. It was a mouthful, but trust me, you guys, I promise it only gets better from here. Before we get into these little bites of information from Kevin, I'd love for you to just dig in a little bit to your background and what you and the folks at Leadium have been up to these days.
Yeah, really quickly, my background, which puts us in an interesting perspective to lead sales at kind of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, is I got started in tech when I was on a founding team of a company that then listed on NASDAQ a year later. We raised about $30 to $40 million, and within 2 years, we were bankrupt. We never made $1 of revenue, and eventually it was delisted far after I came on it. And it was through that experience, as part of the product team, I realized, heck, the focus of any business should be put on actual revenue instead of just on fundraising, on the hopes and idea of one day getting revenue. From there, I actually went to New York and San Francisco, working with a few different startups, working in success, more product, business development, until eventually I landed on, hey, I want to focus on how to drive sales. It was very fortunate. I met my co-founder from the time, who's based in Ukraine, who had similar goals on kind of merging that gap in sales, but also utilizing an outsourced model with the great talent that's overseas. And that's how we got started with Leadium. And really simply, Leadium is a growth partner for any size company that focuses on really 2 early stage pipeline requirements, one being validated contact data. So who are you actually prospecting to? Who's your ideal customer? Okay, and now formulating that and getting their contact details. And then 2, building really effective outbound prospecting programs that are measured or calculated and actually drive results, which is kind of bottom of funnel results.
Right. And so that kind of, I guess, your experience that you described there, no doubt has sort of helped you drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, as far as what you guys are solving for at Leadium. And it goes into like these tasks that take an internal team away from revenue generating, away from that, and not even just that, but away from the things that make them feel good. I've done some, B2B SaaS outreach, some SDR work, some account executive work, and it's hard. And then when you add on top of that, for the personality type that tends to be in these jobs, I mean, it can be such a chore to have to do these things. But still, outsourcing it is just not as prevalent as one might think with understanding those things. So talk to me about some of your experiences that you might have had that inform your approach and passion for what you guys do.
Yeah, we've become really passionate about beating the drum to kind of turning and creating a new face on outsourcing, especially when it comes to sales. It's so prevalent in the marketing community, and everybody's, engages in a marketing agency. And we're really bringing that same agency aspect to outbound. But to your point, prospecting and outbound sales is so valuable to any size businesses, because not only is it driving kind of revenue, opportunities at bottom of funnel, quality qualified calls. But it's also providing you, data back on, well, is my messaging working? If I'm super early stage, am I targeting the right, prospects, the right decision makers? Am I too top of funnel? Am I going after C levels when I should be going after, manager levels? What's my gatekeeper? Depending on segmented, if you're going after different industries, is it the same value propositions? Is everybody caring about the same pain points? And prospecting really returns all of this data, which I argue is actually more important than the opportunities it creates. Because if you throw enough darts at a dartboard, you can create appointments if you're doing outbound prospecting. But if you're not doing it calculated and in a measured way, you're losing all of the value of that prospecting. And so that's really the benefit of it. And it's changing this idea that, outsourcing is all about appointment setting, and more about, hey, there's a grander picture and a foundation you need to establish. And the benefit of doing that can actually produce far more opportunities down the road. And really the magic behind all of that prospecting is repetitive tasks. And that's why a lot of SDRs don't want to be career SDRs, because it's repetitive. So it's incredibly valuable data, incredibly valuable, pipeline opportunities you're creating, but all on the backs of incredibly repetitive tasks. Right. And that's the problem in a lot of modern organizations in keeping great talent and kind of harnessing that great talent, which is where an outsourced vendor kind of comes in and can be incredibly beneficial, especially to an early stage, small size business.
Yeah, so that's that contact sourcing sort of list building, intensive grunt work, for lack of a better term, that role, like you mentioned, and other roles like it are up against, and it takes a lot of people out of the game. I mean, I don't know if you realize this, Kevin, but what you're talking about is the type of thing that saves lives and careers, and I'll tell you what I mean. Like, this is not hyperbole. What I've been is a salesperson of a certain skill set, right? Which happens to maybe not be appointment setting in the traditional way that we think of it, right? The sort of throwing, spitballing or whatever it is, right? Throwing spaghetti at the wall is that? I have no idea. I'm bad with these things. but you know what I mean, right? So that's not my skill. If my skill is relationships, or if my skill is closing, but the barrier for entry, right, to get to the next level of a sales career is that you've proven your grit through the kind of work that you describe, because you don't work for an organization that outsources it. Well, then nobody, not even you, ever gets to realize the potential that you have for these other skill sets that are so important. And so I think what's happening is there are people who would be star salespeople who could elevate an organization or even elevate the profession, who might never get there because they decided to walk away because they had to get through this first step as an SDR doing this work that could have been outsourced, or because there was some arbitrary barrier put in front of them by their organization who refused to outsource it, and they let them go because they didn't need it. Does that make sense? Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to your point, for all greatness that high growth, especially technology companies, provide the world, they often cloud the water on what should be. So most modern businesses cannot afford a dedicated sales development team, right? And so to your point, hey, if I'm going to hire an account executive, now they have to be responsible for pipeline generation, which means their skill set, which is closing, which is relationship building, that's only factoring in 20 or 30% of their time, because they have to be focused on repetitive tasks. I think so many are becoming clouded on the idea that, hey, we should have a dedicated SDR team and SDR managers and multiple layers and SDRs and technologies. And that's what you see on LinkedIn. And that's what becomes normal, so to speak, if you're in that circle. But the truth is, if you go one step outside of Silicon Valley or high growth startup, most modern businesses, which is the majority of businesses, do not have the funds to have an entirely dedicated team just to pipeline creation. And that's kind of where we come in and can fit in, especially so that, hey, account executives and closers and relationship builders focus what you focus on best.
I love it. And so the other thing that goes into it, right, that those roles traditionally would be responsible for is this idea of metric analysis. So even if, let's say, that account executive or that SDR team did take, that chunk of their time, that chunk of their effort doing the work that we just described, well, then the business of knowing how to know what is working is a whole other job in and of itself. And to be able to find the time or the bandwidth to take that on is a whole other thing. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, when you're prospecting, you should be doing it with reason and with a strategy, which means that you have to have data back up that strategy. So it's hard enough to find the contacts to put into that pipeline in order to get that data back, whether you're paying handsomely for a database, whether you're spending the time to source that contact data yourself, validating those email addresses. Well, great. Now that you spent all of that time, the sequences and the campaigns and the prospecting you do to it should be incredibly measured, not just with the personalized messages you're sending them, whether it's multi-touch, multi-channel, specific timing, whatever that prospecting looks like. Now it's, well, how do I start to analyze if it's working or not? If your job is closing deals, if your job is setting pipeline, you're not looking at how efficiently or how effectively am I doing it. You're just looking at how many prospects do I need to put at the top of the funnel to get my goals at the bottom of the funnel. And if I need to put more prospects in, let me prospect more. Whereas, hey, you should actually be analyzing, what are my open rates? What are my conversion rates? How do they differ by segment? How do they differ by persona? Who should I actually be focusing all of my attention on? Am I actually, focusing too much attention on personas or segments or prospects that are converting at lower levels than others? And then the biggest caveat to that is, how does it align with my sales cycle? Am I setting appointments that are actually closing at the highest rate? Because we've seen for a lot of organizations, a segment of your customers that actually underperform with appointments, meaning you don't set as many appointments with them, actually close 3-to-1, 4-to-1 in comparison to those you are setting appointments with. Yep. When you think about your time as an account executive, you want more qualified conversations and leads in that respect, not just more qualified phone calls and demos.
Right. Yeah. And so let's say that same AE or SDR has done those two things, right? Even if they got those two things under their belt, right? I can handle my time. I'm able to contact, source, and list build on my own. I'm able to make sense of these metrics on my own and know what is and is not working in the way you just described. Well, then I've got to take what I've learned and do something with it, right? I've got to validate that contact information. I've got to then upload it into whatever system, a CRM or outreach tool I'm using, and initiate these prospects into the sequence, right? And that's the third step after I've already done these other things, hopefully. So talk a little bit about some of the pains that you've seen people or help people deal with when it comes to that last little dimension of stuff to get through.
Yeah, I think the pain is exactly just the premise of it, right? When you're thinking about outbound prospecting, when you're thinking about the sales development role, the entire role is repetitive in nature and it's cyclical in nature. So not only is each task in your role repetitive, the role itself then just rinse and repeat, just with a more optimized prospect. So when you're when you're sourcing contacts, when you're building initial outbound programs, you're then learning from those outbound programs, and then you're, rinse and repeat. Edit that sequence, edit that campaign, revalidate your contact data, re-update your CRM information, re-update your sales engagement platform like outreach.io, and then restart all of those prospects into a new sequence that you you've recreated for a new purpose or a new engagement. All of that already. Yeah, all of that, is very, and I don't want to belittle any SDR role, and that's not the magic of the SDR role, because that's very repetitive, right? You don't need to be highly qualified to validate email addresses or update a CRM or re-upload leads into an engagement platform and then hit the start button on a sequence, right? The real talent for an SDR, and where I see the SDR role focusing on in the future, is what's the strategy? What's the analytics? How do we optimize this? Because I'll tell you right now, companies like ours can come in and all of those tasks I just labeled to you, do it at very little cost for you at an incredibly high degree and rate, scale exponentially without you ever having to worry about HR at a fraction of the cost of what one single entry-level recent college grad SDR would cost you, who has zero experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you how, if at all, this way that you guys are teaching people to do this process for their good, how it might be phasing out the SDR role. So I like that you talked about how it's not exactly that. It's just maybe freeing them up to do what the magic of that role is really about. So putting them to better use, and then by putting them to better use, putting your AEs to better use, and then by putting your AEs to better use, putting your sales leadership to better use, and so on and so forth. And my mind is blown.
We're not putting anybody out, right? Outreach. Yeah. And companies like this are putting the SDR role as you know it. They're putting it out, right? Because they're automating all of that. They're talking to different CRMs. Some of these systems even have the ability to validate data. Some of them even have the ability to source data and then put it right into a sequence. They're kind of phasing the modern SDR role out and saying, hey, you got to come in, and the SDR role, in reality, it is a career role, because you can become incredibly talented at understanding strategy, analyzing what's working, what's not, understanding the market and where to source new contact data, understanding how to put processes into place to revalidate contact data, how to automate all of your systems so that they talk to each other. Right now, we're able to do that at a higher degree because we do it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies. And across those companies at the same time, we can see what's working and what's not working, which is one aspect that a typical SDR or outbound prospector doesn't have. They've only done it for one company. So they don't know what actually is good or bad. They only know what's good or bad for that one company.
For that organization. But what's so interesting, what you're talking about, it really goes into how folks who take on those kinds of roles see themselves. And I think that if Leadium or, outsourcing in general asks something different or something more of folks in the SDR role and changes how they see themselves, and we start to see ourselves as strategists, as folks who need to have a better understanding of the larger business needs that are going on. I think a couple of things will happen, right? There'll be, like you said, there'll be more of a career to it, and it's looked at less as, this sort of underling entry-level role, and it gets the respect that I think it deserves. But then it has the opportunity to become a bridge between the sales team and marketing. I had the opportunity to work at a company where they treated we as SDRs like the way that you're talking about. So we were in on all the meetings, right? We were if the C-suite was having a meeting about a sales strategy, we were there. If marketing was having meetings about, the event strategy and things like that, or content we were putting out, the SDRs were in there. And we were sort of the gap or the glue between sales and marketing. And because that's so buzzy right now, this is a really tangible way to make that happen. And it sounds counterintuitive, right? You're saying, how do you make SDRs more valuable? Well, outsource their tasks. But no, there's a way that these things can coexist depending on how your organization is designed. And if your organization is a little leaner, then maybe they don't have to, and you still obtain your objectives. This has been really, really valuable. So now, Kevin, now that I've successfully extracted so many beautiful jewels from your brain, I'm interested in what you're putting in there. What are you putting in your brain? What learning resources or resource here have you engaged with? Something you read, something you listened to that informed your approach, or just got you excited these days?
Yeah, it's a twofold question. One is an unfair answer because the unique perspective to our business model is I'm talking to hundreds of business owners on a daily basis, learning about their industry, about their products, about their value propositions, their clients' pain points. And that is educational in itself, because through all of those conversations, through all of those campaigns that they rely on us to build and drive pipeline for them, I'm just able to learn, right? I'm able to learn new aspects to the business that maybe you never thought of. Mm-hmm. And all of these business owners, especially in the SMB and in the SMB market, they're talented at what they do. They're successful because of a reason. They got to where they are for a reason. So I'm always one that I don't necessarily read books. I haven't read many books at all. I like talking to people and learning about their perspective and letting that kind of guide you and kind of taking the best learnings that they have and applying it to what you're able to do. Outside of that, if you go more traditional, and I know everybody doesn't have access to that same capability, although you do, whether it's people in your family who are more experienced, whether it's just friends who are on the upgrade, you can always talk and learn about successes and failures. LinkedIn has become more and more valuable of a tool just in general. If you just sit and scroll, you can see what the people who post as noise and what they're doing. I always sit back and see business owners who are posting 17 times a day, and I look at it with my co-founder and I say, how do they have time? Because I'm busy running a business. I don't know what they're doing for a living and what their investors are looking at, but I'm busy running a business. So you can see a lot of the noise that gets built up. And then you can see the posts from those who are really thoughtful and deliberate about what they're posting, not just as a marketing initiative, but to actually give back. So if you actually read through the lines of LinkedIn, in modern day LinkedIn, there's a lot of great, valuable, lessons that can be had.
Give us one, Kevin. Who's the must follow?
Man, that's a great question. I don't have, and that's where I come up as a failure. I do not have the one must follow.
We'll have to have you back on the show and we'll get...
Yeah, it's going to be a teaser moving forward. That's a hard one for me. There's not one must.
No, but I hear you, man. The folks that post 17 times a day, not only does it come off as noise and you wonder how they have the time, it kind of is, exposing the fact that there's not a strategy behind it. Because no, thoughtful strategy would say post 17 times a day.
Right.
Not even Gary Vee, who's putting out content at sort of a superhuman rate, would say, yeah, you need 17 LinkedIn posts a day. So anyway, preaching to the choir.
And remember, that's his business, right? That doesn't mean every business that makes sense. That's literally his business. I think a lot of people see that as, okay, now I need to do that.
I mean, he's kind of telling people they need to do it, but still, not 17. Anyway, there needs to be a strategy. I digress. How can folks, for those rest of the folks out there whose minds are blown like mine is, and want to keep up with you, what's the best way for folks to connect with you, Kevin?
Yeah, the simplest way is email. It's kevin@leadium.io. Super simple. You can always connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook too, I guess, if you can find me. I guess that's super personal. But definitely on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect directly there. Email is obviously the fastest and easiest. If you write a good prospecting or first email, you typically always get a response. If not, keep trying. I don't mark you as spam. I just wait until you send one that's engaging enough.
I love this. That's a whole other show that I would listen to. Now I want to just send you a bunch of different
there you go.
cold marketing emails and see what you respond to as my little guinea pig. Anyway, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us those 3 things that our teams are doing internally that we could outsource and actually get better results with. I think folks are going to get a lot of value out of it. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.